Welcome back to Honest Straightforward Reviews. I'm super excited today to bring to you a review of the RX 6800 Gaming OC by Gigabyte. This is Gigabyte's GPU that is meant to be slightly overclocked straight out of the box, but without too many bells and whistles such as ARGBs. If you wanted to go the ARGB route, Gigabyte offers the Aorus Master lineup to address that. Today's review would be distributed in three different segments. First, I'll be looking at the card and what it offers, looking at some clock speeds, thermals and noise. In the second part, I'll be looking at 108 tests that I have run on this card, the reference AMD RX 6800, the Founders Edition RX 3070 and the RTX 3070 FTW Ultra by EVGA. These gaming test results will be explored in graphs. Finally, I'll be looking at the average of all tests, comparing it to the MSRP and real-world costs of these cards and providing you with a frame cost and my verdict. I would like to take this opportunity to add that this channel survives on your subscriptions and likes. So if you would like to see more content, kindly ensure that you subscribe to this channel. I also have Instagram, TikTok, Twitter and Patreon. Please do check them out and follow me there to support. The Gaming OC offers a 3-fan cooling solution that uses Gigabyte's WindForce 3X cooling system, which has an alternate middle fan spin. The company claims that in this manner there is increased air pressure and reduced turbulence, meaning it'll keep the card cooler and quieter. It also has the fan stop feature that was introduced by AMD's reference variants. This cooler is also used on other GPUs with far higher TDP such as the RTX 3080 and RTX 3090. What that signifies for me is that this cooler can keep those hot cards cool, so it should have no problems with the RTX 6800 as it's a card that uses a lot less TDP than those cards. In my test, I found the cooler to be a tiny bit louder when compared to some other coolers. I was surprised at how small this card is, and therefore I don't expect it to do as well as some large cards when it especially comes to thermals and noise, such as the Power Color and Asus Tough variants. The Gaming OC had cutouts in the back to dispense heat by having a better airflow. The Gaming OC is powered by two 8-pin connectors and has a dual BIOS switch. By default, the card is set to overclock BIOS. If switched, the other mode offers a quiet BIOS. It has an increased base clock speed by a respectable 110 MHz, followed by a 65 MHz increase on the gaming clock and a 50 MHz increase on the boost clock. The Gigabyte logo on the card is the only piece of RGB that you will be able to find on this card, and is controlled with Gigabyte's RGB Fusion 2.0 software, where the user can use it to choose any color from a color wheel and also apply any rhythms such as pulsing, solid colors or flashing, etc. Another software that you can use with the Gaming OC is called the Aorus engine, which would give the user control over the clock speed, voltage, fan performance and power target in real time according to the game's requirement. Of course, this can all be done with AMD's stock software as well. Now, without further ado, let's get into the graphs. Now, the first graph I've got for you guys are the clock speeds. I've got the reference AMD RX 6800 up top. I've got the Gaming OC by Gigabyte and the Aorus Master following that, and finally I've got the Founders Edition RTX 3070 down the bottom. Now, obviously the RTX is a different architecture. Don't be comparing the megahertz to megahertz. It's a completely different architecture. It also uses GDDR6X, and that's different to GDDR6. Now, let's start off with the Gaming OC. So the Gaming OC has a base clock of 1925, which is a 110 improvement. However, it's behind the Aorus Master, which goes to 1980. When gaming, it goes up to 2065, which is about 30 megahertz behind behind the Aorus Master, which is not much, and when you have the boost clock applied, it goes to 2155, which is about 45 behind the Aorus Master. However, those are quite significant improvements over the reference card. Now let's look at power consumption. The reference AMD card averages at about 123 watts. The gaming OC takes this to about 250. When we compare this to the Founders Edition RTX 3070, that only consumes about 220, and when we look at the EVGA Ultra, that consumes about 221 on average. Now the max wattage is quite a different story. Let's look at the reference AMD, which doesn't really max more than 232. However, the gaming OC really pushes the card to 301 watts. The Founders Edition goes to 242 and the Ultra goes to 289. Now the next graph I've got for you guys has two main things to take away from it. So if you look at the coulombs on the left, the first two, they are to do with when the card is just sitting in the case and it's not doing anything. The right three are to do with gaming, so when you're gaming on the card. So first we look at the temperature for the RX 6800, which is at about 49 degrees with fan stop. And if you look at the Ultra with just the normal BIOS, it goes to 42 degrees with fan stop. However, if you've got the overclock on, it has the fan idling at about 30 decibels, which is not loud enough to be able to be heard over the fan case fans, and the temperature drops all the way to 30 degrees, which is quite impressive. The RTX 3070 Founders Edition is also quite cool at 38 degrees. When we are looking at the gaming OC, it actually drops a degree when you are going to the quiet BIOS. However, when gaming, the quiet BIOS is a tiny bit hotter at 73 degrees, and the fan actually, to my surprise, was spinning harder. So the quiet BIOS is not much of a go for me, whereas the overclocking BIOS saw the GPU at 69 degrees and it was quieter and it was running a lot less harder as well. So I think that would be really good for this card. So the overclock BIOS, the normal one, when you take it out of the box, the switch, don't switch it to quiet. The other one is quiet, so don't switch it quiet BIOS. Now the first test I've got for you guys is the new Unigine 2 Superposition test that I've done in DirectX 11 with extreme settings. Now let's look at the FPS. First of all, we have got the AMD RX 6800 XT at 64 frames. Surprisingly, the gaming OC didn't improve on this at all, and to my surprise, the Founders Edition RTX 3070 did a nice 69 frames, and the Ultra improved on that to 71. The next test I've got for you guys is 3DMark, and I've got TimeSpy and FireStrike, and both of these are in scores and they've been done in DirectX 12 with extreme settings. Let's first of all look at TimeSpy. Looking at the reference RX 6800 XT, that's at about 14,327. Now AMD does a lot better in this test, okay, and don't ask me why, but it does. So let's look at this test. So when we're looking at the gaming OC, it only improves by 150 score, which is not quite impressive, okay. The Founders Edition at 12,619 and the Ultra at 13,649. Guys, from here on, I'm not going to talk about the Ultra and the Founders Edition. That information is there for you guys to compare. I will talk about it in the end though, to shed light on the bang for buck and how much they cost and things like that. I will mention it in the games if the Ultra is outperforming the gaming OC by a big margin. Alright, let's go on to the next test, which is FireStrike. The score that you get for the RX 6800 was 10,276, and the gaming OC again only saw an improvement of about 125, which is not too impressive. Now the first game I've got for you guys is Cyberpunk 2077, and I've done the tests with, you guys will be happy to hear this, with the patch 1.21, which is the latest patch and makes the game a lot more stable. Looking at 4K, all of the cards did the exact same 31 frames, which is quite disappointing for the gaming OC, especially when you're considering the reference card costs a lot less than this card. This is, guys, a very expensive card, by the way, just letting you guys know. When we move on to 2K, again, we see the same, a margin of error frame here and there. So this was a very surprising result for me. Next game I've got for you guys is Metro Exodus, and at 4K, we've got the reference and gaming OC at exact same. game at 75 frames. However, when we go to 2K, we see a margin of error improvement in the gaming OC by 1 frame at 127 over the 126 by the reference card. The next game I've got for you guys is Borderlands 3. At 4K, again we see the same story. They're both stuck at 52 frames. We see the Nvidia cards doing a lot better, especially the Ultra at 55 frames, which is a 3 frame improvement, which is impressive at this low end, especially with 4K. When we move on to 2K, we see a 2 frame improvement for the gaming OC over the reference AMD card, which again is not too impressive. The next game I've got for you guys is Death Stranding. Now, Death Stranding sees a margin of error 1 frame in 4K improvement for the gaming OC. When we go to 2K, again, there's just 1 frame in there. Next game I've got for you guys is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. At 4K, we have the exact same result for both the cards at 48 frames. When we move on to 2K, the gaming OC improves that by a margin of error 1 frame, which again isn't too impressive, especially given how much this card costs. Next game I've got for you guys is Battlefield 5. At 4K, again margin of error 1 frame improvement for the gaming OC. When we move on to 2K, we see a 2 frame improvement for the gaming OC. Even at 2K on this high end, 2 frames is not something to brag about. The next game I've got for you guys is Civilization 6. Civilization 6 sees an exact same score at 4K for both the cards. When we move on to 2K, again we see the exact same scores. There's no improvements whatsoever. The next test I've got for you guys is Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal is another game where we see both the cards have the exact same score of 124 frames. When we move on to 2K, we see a 2 frame improvement. Over 200 frames, that means nothing. The next game I've got for you guys is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. At max settings, at 4K, it sees the same score again at 78. However, when we move to 2K, there's a margin of error 1 frame improvement at 150 for the gaming OC. The next game I've got for you guys is Control. Control is a title that is an Nvidia title, so we'll see both the cards can't be played at 4K with this game at all. It's unplayable, in my opinion, 36 frames for both. When we move on to 2K, it's kind of playable. I would have liked to see the 90 frame mark, which is my preference for these sort of games, and we see a frame improvement on the gaming OC over the reference. However, we see the Ultra really outshine at 78 frames. The next game I've got for you guys is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Star Wars sees both the games again at 55 frames, and when we move to 2K, just a frame improvement at 114 for the gaming OC. Where we do see improvement is again in the Ultra, which jumps up to 117 frames. The next game I've got, and which is the last game as usual in the charts, is Witcher 3, and that sees nothing that has changed for both the cards. Both the cards perform exactly the same at 4K at 84 frames per second, and when we go on to 2K, we see 1 frame improvement for the gaming OC. Okay guys, let's look at the 12 gaming average, and to be honest, very disappointed with the gaming OC so far from what I've seen, because one, it's really expensive. I've seen it all the way up to 1799 Australian dollars to be sold in Australia for that RX 6800 card. It's not a RX 6800 XT that I'm looking at, not a 6900 XT, it's just the 6800 gaming OC by Gigabyte. So that is really expensive. Now let's look at the first average for 4K. Okay, we've got the RX 6800 at 78.45 frames, and the gaming OC is no better at 78.64. That's less than margin of error, you know. I would consider them the same. The RTX 3070 Founders Edition is at 73.55 frames, and the Ultra, to my surprise, didn't do that well. I thought Nvidia cards do really well. Maybe I got a dud here at 75 frames. Now let's move on to 2K. At 2K, we see a tiny difference between the RX 6800 XT at 133.45 frames, the gaming OC being at 134.64 frames. To my opinion, the reference card would do here. We see the Ultra at 128.36 to my surprise again, very slow, and the Founders Edition at 123.91 frames. Let's look at some of the pricing, and I've included a Gigabyte RX 5700 XT last gen graphic card gaming OC as well, which is being superseded by this card. card, and I wanted to look at the markups and things like that. So let's look at our MSRP. For that card was $559. The reference 6800 is at $749, and the gaming OC should be sold at about $866. Now the Founders Edition is a nice $649, which is a really good price for that card, and the Ultra is all the way up to $874. Mind you guys, these are MSRP, which mean nothing in this world. Now let's look at real world pricing. At real world pricing, we see the last gen 5700 XT gaming OC jump up to $961, guys. That's completely not worth it. The reference card goes up to nearly $1,100. I got this card at $1,659, and that's what the average was. As I mentioned, I did see this card at a lot higher at $1,799 as well, which is completely crazy. I've seen the Founders Edition go for $1,049, okay, and that's when it was on the market. As you guys might know, and if you don't know, here's some information for you. Nvidia sells it at the start, and after that it pulls it out of the market, so you can't find Founders Edition cards anymore unless if it's secondhand or being resold. The Ultra is at a whopping $1,219, which doesn't look that big when you consider it against the gaming OC. The next test I have for you is the best bang for your buck card when it comes to 2K gaming. First we look at MSRP. The reference 6800 costs about $5.61 per frame at 4K. The gaming OC jumps up to $6.43, not worth it in my opinion. The Founders Edition is the cheapest per frame card, which is $5.23, and the Ultra is the most expensive in this when it comes to MSRP pricing at $6.81. When we go to real world pricing and compare that per frame, the reference card goes up to $8.24, which is the cheapest out of the lot. The gaming OC goes to a whopping $12.32, which is the most expensive out of the lot. The Founders Edition goes at $8.47, while the Ultra goes about $9.50, which is a very good price if you ask me in the current market for what you get with that EVGA card. When we go on to 4K gaming, looking at MSRP, we'll be looking at $9.55 per frame for the RX 6800. When we go on to the gaming OC, we see a $11.01. As usual, the Founders Edition was the cheapest at $8.82, and the Ultra was the most expensive at MSRP at $11.51. This doesn't mean anything as usual. Let's look at the real world pricing. The RX 6800 costs $14.01. The gaming OC costs a whopping $21.10 per frame. The Founders Edition costs a $14.26, and the Ultra at $16.06. Alright guys, that's basically it for these cards. Now let's get into my verdict. To be honest guys, Gigabyte made a really impressive card in terms of the fan and how cool it keeps it. It gets a bit noisy to my opinion, okay, when you compare it to the bigger cards, and the thermals aren't that impressive, but it is impressive in the terms that it's really shrunk it down. It's a really small card, and it's that RX 6800 card that is shrunk by Gigabyte. So in that terms, it's impressive. If you wanted a reference 6800 XT in a small case, it wouldn't fit, whereas the gaming OC would, and it doesn't lose out on performance. It's on par with the 6800. However, if you were someone who didn't care about the space in their case, you had a big case and you're putting a graphic card in there, in any other scenario, the gaming OC is completely not worth it. Even in that scenario, it just costs too much. There's an over $7 per frame increase when you're gaming at 4K when you compare it to the reference RX 6800, and there's a whopping $4 per frame increase when you game at 2K. In my opinion, the gaming OC is not worth it for those reasons. When the price does come down at 2K, it is okay at $6.43 for what you get. Other than that, I think when it comes down, if it ever does come down at $6.43 at MSRP, it's a good card for a small system. It's well cooled and it's not too bad at all. Alright guys, that's it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank you for staying to the end. Take good care. Bye bye.